Well, we usually at this point in time kill time by just mentioning everyone going around, whoever's here, to introduce ourselves. I'm Dick Flax, co-chair of SBCAN, proudly convening the South Coast Roundtable every month. Glad to be able to do that. And I'll turn it over to Ken.
Hi, everybody. Ken Huff, Executive Director with SBCAN for 10 years now and loving every minute of it, especially since Nadia came on board and took on a lot of the duties. Nadia?
She's doing all the work. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nadia. Yeah, I'm Advocacy and Events Director with SBCAN. And we can go to Linda.
Hello, everybody. Linda Hannah-Beth. I'm the housing chair for the League of Women Voters Santa Barbara. But if I say anything today, I'm doing that as an individual. And we can pass it over to Lisa. And Lisa, I can hear your car. So at some point,
okay. Thanks.
You may want to figure out how you mute yourself. I have no idea about on the phone.
Okay, let me see how I mute myself, and I'm sorry about that.
We can probably, they can probably mute you from there.
Yeah, I can mute you, but I don't know how you unmute.
But anyway, go ahead and introduce yourself.
I figured it out. So sorry, guys. Yeah, I'm in a car headed up to the Bay Area. I'm Lisa Carlos. I'm also on the board of the League of Women Voters, as well as on the board of Habitat for Humanity. And like Linda, I'll be speaking as an individual if I speak at all today. So thank you.
Sarah, why don't you say who you are?
Hi, I'm Sarah MacDonald. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm on the land of the Chumash, and I'm affiliated with so many organizations, and they're growing, and a lot of excitement there. As soon as the ink is dry on this thing that I'm hedging about, I'll tell you. But I'm part of the NAACP, League of Women Voters, Surge, Poor People's Campaign, and president of the Democratic Club of Santa Maria Valley. And I'm going to pass it along to Vicki.
Yes. Hello. I'm Vicki Allen, and I am the VP for Communications for the League of Women Voters. And I'm here, as always, to listen and learn.
Thanks for being here. And Kathy from Planned Parenthood, are you there?
Hi, I'm Catherine Henry, she, her pronouns. I'm the Santa Barbara County Community Organizer for Planned Parenthood California Central Coast. And my Wi-Fi is really rough today, so probably just gonna get the lovely Planned Parenthood logo.
Gail Osherenko has just joined us. We're just introducing ourselves very briefly. Gail, how are you?
I'm fine. I spent 5 minutes trying to log on to the website link that you guys had sent earlier for this meeting that I had in my calendar. And then I went back to my email, and I think you must have changed it. Anyway, so if other people are late, maybe.
Oh, sorry about that. Let me see. I'll look into that right now.
I'm here today because I'm really interested in hearing what Meagan has to say and seeing where we're going. Hi, Meagan.
Hi.
On the housing issues.
Very good. Harold, you there? Harold Hill.
I'm here, Dick. My lighting isn't quite right because I'm coming in from Redlands, California, but that's okay. I'd like to hear what's going on.
Thank you very much. And,
my hometown, Hal.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm very much familiar with the fact that your parents still live here.
Yeah.
All right. Well, a lot of people are driving while doing this, which is scary in a way. Be careful. So we'll keep going on this. This is fun in itself. Benjamin Peterson joined us. Benjamin, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
We just say who you are.
I'm Benjamin Pierce. I'm with the Office of State Senator Monique Limon.
Very happy to have you with us. So I think we've got, a semblance of a quorum here, and we have the pleasure, as always, a pleasure that Meagan Harmon's able to join us. Thank you, Meagan. And before we talk about the main topic we were interested in about the vacation short-term rental topic, hot topic, you had other news about housing that seems to have not been above the radar, but we are very interested in. So why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Dick and Nadia. Thank you guys so much for having me. And I have to apologize. My computer sound is not working for some reason. So that's why you're on my phone. Hopefully it's okay. It's full of tech challenges today. But yeah, this was very interesting to me that it flew so much under the radar. I don't even think it hit the papers at all. And I will say up front that I recognize that the process that we got to allocating this funding is not without its own pain points. And so let me back up a little bit. So we've long been talking, I know at SBCAN, you guys have been talking for many years, and I've joined that conversation for the last couple of years about setting up a housing fund, whether it's a revolving loan fund, whether it's something else, whatever it looks like, we need to get a revenue stream available, free up money so that our affordable housing developers can leverage that funding and get housing built. So this has been a drumbeat, which has really been growing. Unfortunately, at the city, we have a sort of similar drumbeat growing of, oh my gosh, we're going to have some major structural deficit issues that we're going to be facing in the next 3 to 5 years. So it's been this real tension, actually trying to figure out how to get the funding that's clearly needed set aside for this fund, and also deal with a lot of the issues we're having at the city related to budgetary matters. So that's by way of background. Fast forward, we had a conversation about our CDBG allocation. Now there's 2 funding streams for these grants. They're grants that go yearly to local nonprofits. One, it's federal money. That's not changing. That we couldn't change even if we wanted to, and that will still be allocated to nonprofits. The other is a grant from our general fund that's given to nonprofits. They go through an application process, and we give usually like $10,000 to $30,000 grants, small grants, not huge. I mean, there's been an ongoing conversation for the last 3 years about whether we're doing the right thing with this money. It's really been more of a Band-Aid rather than trying to actually impact some of these problems. I mean, we have this interesting list of priorities for this money. Chief among them is related to housing insecurity and homelessness. But rather than spend that money on actually developing housing, we're sort of just papering over it by giving these $10,000 to $30,000 grants. So this has been a long conversation we've had at council. Are we doing the right thing with this money? Are we actually serving people? Unfortunately, of late, that conversation had evolved even more to, should we be giving this money at all, given that we have these budget crises? So what we did a couple of weeks ago in connection with this conversation was take $250,000 over the next each year for 3 years to be allocated. It's going directly into the Housing Trust Fund, but it will be for use of an affordable housing fund of the type that we've described. What's really exciting about that is behind the scenes, we've been having conversations with philanthropic partners about matching or doubling that money and really trying to harness our collective power in the Santa Barbara community to get a fund set up that's going to have sufficient dollar value to be able to make meaningful both loans and grants. Actually, interestingly, as this is kind of shaping up, it's looking like there will be both a grant program and a revolving loan fund out of this. And the cool thing, I mean, I think I'm preaching to the choir about this, but the community was so ready for this type of fund and to really commit to it and take a big swing at developing affordable housing. What was really necessary, though, was a clear city commitment to actually doing that, to really putting our money where our mouth is when it comes to affordable housing. And having done that, I've seen a huge shift in the engagement from our philanthropic community and a willingness to just say, yes, we've got big problems. We're going to take a big swing at it. And I will say, my mom just walked in, you guys. So I'm on a meet with folks talking about housing. So one of the challenges, of course, though, is that our local nonprofits do hugely impactful work in the community, and there is a little bit less money in that pot. And I think we have to acknowledge that that's going to be challenging. But my goal is to come back in 3-4 years and look at those priorities that we've laid out to be able to say, wow, we have made a meaningful difference in actually solving the problems that we've been seeking to solve, and we can move these priorities aside and put new ones up there. That's really what we're looking to do. So it's a long-winded way of saying been a circuitous process, but the money is starting to flow. We're going to have a conversation about excess TOT revenue and including that in the pot as well. And I just, the excitement's really growing, and a big part of that is due to the work that you all have done, continually coming to council saying we need to get this funded. Let's figure out a way to make it happen. And I'm seeing a clear path. It's really exciting.
And I'm glad you mentioned the TOT, because that's one of the tax measures that could be added to the fund that you're talking about. People are discussing a vacant homes tax, which other cities have done. They're discussing a high-end real estate sales tax kind of a measure, which is on the ballot in LA, that kind of measure. So I think there are a number of organizations in the housing advocacy world who we're thinking we need a ballot initiative on those tax kinds of measures. But thank you for that. So, and you mentioned a housing trust fund. Is that, we actually have a housing trust fund?
We do. We have an existing housing trust fund. I don't believe that that's where the money will end up. We simply moved it there with an earmark so that we forced ourselves not to spend it somewhere else, frankly. But yeah, I mean, it could end up there. Right now we are in the process of developing what this fund is going to look like. Is it with the Santa Barbara Foundation? Is it with another nonprofit partner? Who's going to is it with Montecito Bank and Trust? I mean, there's a lot of people that really are interested and excited. To Gail's question, I do think that this will be managed by the city in partnership potentially with someone else, but we've got some tax considerations. I mean, there's a lot of different things that we have to be careful about when we give that kind of money, and we want to have some control too, right? To say we only want housing that is capital A affordable, and if we sort of relinquish all control by just wiring the money outside, we lose our ability. And we want the partners that make use of these grants, frankly, to be able to say it has city backing. I mean, that's a big part of this. And Rob Fredericks is constantly telling us, like, look, all money is good money, right? But city money gives us the ability to go get low income tax credit financing. And we are that much better off when we make that application because we have municipal partners. So we want to be able to maintain that leveraging possibility. So it's kind of this dual effort, right? We need the money. We also need to be able to say that the city is bought in, and using that, we can get 10 to 1 on every dollar. We can get units actually built in a way that we haven't seen. So that's what we're looking for, and it's exciting. I mean, I'm repeating myself now, but really it is to your credit. I'm looking at all of you who are on this call, and so many of you, I've heard you come to council, I've heard you advocate for this, and I thought it was going to be really controversial, frankly, in some ways, but everybody was behind it. I mean, there again, it's nothing's ever simple, but it was monumental actually, and I think that we'll see in the next few years a really significant shift in our ability to get housing built.
Well, thank you for the report and for your efforts to create this.
Of course, thank you.
This very difficult issue of providing real funding for social housing in this community. So vacation rental, short-term rental, whatever we want to call this, this is a hot issue because the numbers of people are doing it. They're renting. They're in the industry, you might say, of B&B type industry. And it's controversial because the effects of that kind of practice have been troubling to different neighborhoods. But the most immediate concern I think our groups have is the way in which short-term rental take away rental needs for people who live in Santa Barbara. We thought of asking Meagan, member of the city council, because we know she has thoughts about this, and I think we'd like to hear what people like us are thinking. And also because I think you're on the Coastal Commission is relevant to this question of what kind of regulation of that's the issue, what kind of regulation of short-term rental can happen. City staff presented to the council a kind of menu of regulation. The council, did it punt or sent the issue back to the Planning Commission, which is fine, I guess, but it's all not gelled, right? There isn't a clear path. So that's one thing we can accomplish today, is to see what some of those dilemmas are, what the options are, and you're always a smart figure in the room to tell us what you're thinking and what are your questions that you're not settled on. So
yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm so glad we're having this conversation because it is really complicated. But I believe absolutely critical that while we work on the production side, we get our regulatory house in order. And this is just a crucial part of it. So what happened? I'm getting a lot of confusion from folks about what was presented at City Hall, why it was presented, where we are in the process. And I have learned a lot actually hearing from people about like, what the heck was that? About how much more clearly we need to speak. So what staff did, to their credit, right? They heard from City Council, we're tired of getting ordinances after you've already drafted them, because we don't necessarily like that. We want to have community input over the whole process. And so staff heard, okay, what we're going to do is we have this idea. We're going to pitch it to you guys and you give us your feedback. And it's kind of like a brainstorming session. I think even City Council forgot that that's what we asked, because we were like, oh, holy crap. You know what I mean? So it was just kind of a mess. And I think it really freaked people out. But what it was meant to be, I think it freaked us out too, by the way, all of it, collective people. But what it was meant to do really was to be a kickoff session, to say we have this whole long process to go through. We have to go to Planning Commission. We're going to have multiple hearings, multiple community talkback sessions, ultimately get back to you. Before we do all that, let's see if we're even in the ballpark of the right direction. So the good news is, right, there's many, many, many more opportunities to craft a policy or a framework that works for our community. I will also add that there is this really challenging and nuanced communication issue that I'm having. And I, in terms of questions, I would love your feedback on how to thread this needle, because when we talk about a short-term rental policy and putting one in place, what people hear is you're going to allow them. And what I'm trying to do is limit them to the greatest extent possible in a way that's actually effective. So when I heard staff's proposal, which was to require that short-term rentals only be allowed if it's your primary home, meaning if you have a second home, like me as an individual, Meagan Harmon, a renter, if I go away for 2 weeks in order to afford my vacation, I can short-term rental my place. But if I owned a second apartment, I could never short-term rent that second place, only the one that's my primary home. To me, that's much more in line with the idea of home share that originally was what Airbnb was. Like, remember 10 years ago, when I was doing Airbnb, when I was in college, it was like you shared it with the weird host, you know what I mean? Like, that was the fun part about it, actually. that was the experience. It was a home share, not a rental. So to me, when I heard that their proposal is that it must be your primary home and it's limited to a certain number of days, 30, 60, whatever, it's much more like, oh, you go away on vacation, or teachers, right, who go away for a month during the summer, rent out their place for a couple of weeks and then come back, but they're very much members of the community. They are not taking housing stock away from Santa Barbara residents. It's just a way to get some income and, you know, back to more the home share model. I loved it. I thought, well, this is exactly what we've been looking for, because through a mechanism like this, we will then have enough revenue to actually enforce against the guys that are the bad actors, that are these second, you know, they're owned in an LLC, it's an investment property, you know, but the problem is it's really hard to communicate that nuance. And so what people hear is you want to allow them. And I'm like, no, I want to allow them so that I can disallow them, which is shockingly not a great argument to make. It's not a good soundbite, you know? So that is one question, and maybe we'll put a pin in that for a second, because I have a second question for you all, something I'm really, really struggling with. And this was the other issue that came up. City staff had suggested that we allow this primary home option. I'm going to call it the home share option, though it's not technically a home share. I would like us to go to home share, but let's just call it home share for ease of communication. This home share option would be allowed citywide, not just in the R4 district. Their view, and I frankly share this view, is that even if you allowed it citywide, by requiring a home share, you would still have less STRs than you currently have now. I mean, it just is really going to pare it back. But even bracketing that, I struggle, because people say, we don't want STRs because it takes away housing stock, particularly rental housing stock, right? But if we're only going to allow it in the areas of the city where we primarily have our multifamily home housing, aren't we actually hurting the type of housing that we're trying to increase? So to me, I'm saying if the purpose of limiting STRs is because it impacts our housing stock, wouldn't it be preferable to us to only allow it on the Riviera and to disallow it in areas where we've got apartment buildings and that type of housing that's more affordable in our community? And furthermore, if short-term rentals actually push up the value of housing, wouldn't we want to make sure that it's not allowed in our neighborhoods where there's multifamily housing, workforce housing, middle-class housing in our community? To me, it seems like almost a NIMBY thing being wrapped up in an affordable housing argument. What I think we should, I mean, this will never fly in the city of Santa Barbara. And, you know, I would say, don't quote me, but I'm being recorded. But I think if what we really want to do is keep affordable housing more affordable, make sure that our multifamily housing is available for our workforce, we would prohibit STRs in the R4 zone and only allow them in the quote unquote neighborhoods, like the Upper East, like the Riviera, like, you know, Bungalow Haven. To me, those type of houses are never going to be accessible for working families in the city of Santa Barbara. What is going to be accessible are the apartments and the apartment buildings. And unfortunately, the path that we're going on, in part because it's such a nuanced and difficult conversation, is to only allow them in the neighborhoods that are already lower income working class people. And I think we are cutting off our nose to despite our face with a policy like that. I think it's got to be citywide. But you know, I am the lone voice making that argument. And I think for many reasons, you know, people don't like it, but it's also just, it's so nuanced and complicated that it's not easy to discuss. So 2 questions for you. How do you communicate that by putting in a framework, we actually could be limiting it? Second, what do you all think about that distinction between citywide or just allowing it in multifamily zones versus what we're trying to accomplish with affordable housing in multifamily zones?
So before we open the floor, which is a great, thanks for asking us to do that. Part of one of the policy things you haven't mentioned yet that I didn't know about but that justifies the regulation process that you say is hard to explain, is that if you, part of the regulation is to give permits to people to do short-term rental. And apparently the Airbnb and other online entities like that are willing to help enforce permits, in other words, and that's critical for enforcement. I mean, the problem is, isn't it, that you can't really, without some methods like that, it's very hard for the city to enforce any regulation on this. So you want to comment on that?
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. Apparently the technology has evolved very effectively since our first sort of failed framework was put in place. And one of the things that Airbnb, VRBO, whatever can do now and do in other communities quite well is, they ask for your permit number to put up your home. If you don't have one, it gets pulled within 24 hours or something like that, or 60. It's really quite effective, but you have to pay for it. I mean, it's not free. Nothing is ever free, unfortunately. And it requires some other, you need to hire, there's a company that does it for you. I mean, it costs money, but it's definitely doable. And this tracks with what I've heard from other jurisdictions. I think, Dick, I'd talked to you about this. I'd spoken to some folks from the city of LA over the last, 2 years or so, and they had gone through a similar process to putting in place a framework that allows short-term rentals in order to limit them. And it had been very, very effective for them. So, and that's tracks with what I see. I mean, I remember I lived in LA a couple of years, 8 years ago or whatever, and they were everywhere, and it's just not the same anymore. So.
All right. So I think it would be a good idea, especially since Meagan really would like to hear our voices, if people immediately have points to raise, either in response to the questions that she was asking us to think about. How can we explain to the wider community that regulation enables limitation rather than simply permitting? That became. Anybody want to tackle that particular point right now? What would be what's your understanding of that? But rather than just focus it that way, I want to have the floor open. I just thought of one other point which you raised that I want to drive home. Some of the testimony on the day the council talked about this came from these multiple unit owners, right? Who want to be able to justify what they're doing. And they're pretty open about this. What's your understanding of what's going on with this? Is it really a significant area of investment by profit-seeking entities now, creating these short-term rental, buying up property and using it for this? Is that what we're dealing with in the city?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think there's that. And I think there is also a fair amount of second home ownership. And here is where I actually had a meeting about this yesterday with one of the proprietors of a short-term rental management business. And you can imagine it was like a very testy meeting. But, one of the things that person kept saying to me was like, people who own second homes are going to own them anyway. They just want to be able to do this. And I kept saying, well, if they're going to own them anyway, why do they care whether or not they can short-term rental them out? Like, it shouldn't bother anybody, right? I mean, if I ban them and these people are so rich that they're still going to buy a second home, then it doesn't matter to them. And they should be able to just move on and find other money-making opportunities. The truth is, though, and this is where we got to by the end of the conversation, a fair number of folks who have a second home from LA, from wherever, they actually do need the income stream from their short-term rental in these second homes. They need it to cover upkeep costs. They need it to cover taxes. I mean, whatever. They would not necessarily have purchased, but for the opportunity to make money while they're not there. And so to me, it's absolutely worth it to take away that extra incentive. And I'm like, anything I can do to make it less attractive to buy these homes is better for our community. But that gets to my other point. Look, our working folks in the city of Santa Barbara are not looking to buy homes on the Riviera. So if we're going to allow it anywhere, we should allow it up there. We shouldn't allow it in places where working people are more likely to be able to afford to live. It just doesn't make sense to me that we would prohibit it in neighborhoods where working folks are already priced out, but allow it in the areas of the city where they might possibly have a chance to be able to find a place that they can afford. But to your actual question, Dick, I think it's both. It's investment properties and second homeowners who have found second home ownership here affordable because they have an extra income stream.
Right. Linda, hand is up. Go ahead.
So I haven't really absorbed what you're talking about now because that's a totally new concept and I may need more time. But from a messaging point of view, it would be so much better if we could announce something that applies to all of the city of Santa Barbara instead of having something is one way in the coastal zone. And I agree with you. I think, the idea of having the owner occupied requirement makes a huge difference, and that would be a good way to reduce the number. How does it work with the Coastal Commission? What would we be allowed to do?
Great, thank you.
A great question, and it is one that is still in flux at the commission. A year ago, I would have told you, let's not even think about the coastal zone because we're going to have to allow it there. I actually don't feel that way anymore. And I think we have an incredible opportunity at the Coastal Commission to have a policy in our coastal zone that does as much as our other inland areas to limit short-term rentals. And there's a couple of reasons for that. We have a very, very pro-housing, pro-affordable housing contingent on the commission right now. I personally believe that we have the votes just barely, by the barest of bare majorities, to pass a short-term rental coastal policy that has owner occupied or a home share option, or even owner occupied with a cap. I think we could pass that. Now, you could absolutely never pass a ban. That's never going to fly. A total ban is not going to happen, but a cap and the owner occupied restriction is very possible. I think for a couple of reasons, because you have a very pro housing, pro community contingent on the commission. And also because specifically in the city of Santa Barbara, we have a huge number of hotel rooms and we've got a range of costs. I mean, all of them are expensive, but the cheapest Santa Barbara hotel is no different from the cheapest Airbnb. So the argument that it's lower cost is just not, it doesn't really track. And we've seen that jurisdiction across jurisdictions. So it is possible to get it through. I will say a couple of things though. The majority is so slim on the Coastal Commission that if not all of us are present, then and it's hard. I mean, it's really hard to get everyone there every month. That's so we will have to, that's my job though, to whip those votes. And so when it comes to the commission, I will do that work. I'll drag them from wherever they are. The other thing that I would say is staff is still not particularly enthused with these types of limitations. They understand them for what they are, an effort to limit as much as is possible short-term rentals. And they still struggle, and I totally respect where they're coming from. The Coastal Act does not, I feel that I've found the basis under the Coastal Act to make these decisions, but you have to contort a little bit, you know what I mean? It's not, the Coastal Act is clear about access. It's clear about low-cost visitor serving accommodation. And so it's really about trying to talk your way through nuance, and staff has not come around to the position that the housing cohort has come around to. So that is a tension. But I will just say, and sorry, I'm talking so much. I love this subject. Last week at the commission, we had what was the jurisdiction? I honestly don't remember the jurisdiction, but they brought a short-term rental ordinance that was very restrictive, more restrictive even than what we're talking about here. Staff panned it. I mean, full on panned it. And the commission, enough of us were vocal enough about how we support it and what about the character of the community. And that's also elemental under the Coastal Act. And so we sent it back for more information, which does not sound like a big deal, but in the Coastal Commission world, that's like a tectonic shift, that we were able to say, wait a second, we are not gonna just rubber stamp denying these kinds of limitations. Our job as Coastal Commission is not only to provide access, but to preserve the existing beauty of coastal communities. And if what we're doing by allowing access is undermining that which makes the coast so special, the communities that make up our coastal communities, well, then we've also failed in our job as coastal commissioners. So we've got to figure out that balance. And I think the fact that we sent it back, despite staff saying not only no, but hell no, this doesn't work, I think is really reflective of the new approach of the commission on short-term rentals. I mean, it's just every community is having this struggle. So I think people look at me like I'm crazy, but I believe that we have a shot to get something meaningful done in the coastal zone as well.
Could I make a comment on this based on my experience working with SUN and the UCSB LRDP? And the fear was that the Coastal Commission would not allow restriction on parking because the Coastal Act is so emphatic about access. And in the past, the Coastal Commission has required more parking provided by UCSB for coastal access than the campus had planned for. And our aim with respect to the future was to restrict parking and traffic to, automobile traffic to UCSB. Well, what happened is the staff did agree that parking should be restricted. In fact, they were very creative about figuring out the way in which parking could be restricted. So that's, to my understanding, a rather significant change in the culture of the planning of the Coastal Commission staff with respect to parking. So maybe the housing issue is possible there. Just a thought about that. Nadia, your hand has been up for a while.
Yeah, I have a couple of things. So I guess just to your first question about how to sort of talk about this to members of the community, I've been having some conversations with, friends and housemates or people in the community who really don't know very much about even like the makeup of the city council or this is just an issue that people really care about, even if they're not like paying attention to these things. And if you have the time to really talk them through, well, we have an ordinance right now, but there's no way to really enforce it because you have to somebody has to make a complaint. And then by that, and even if they do, if they get through the whole process, the fine is so low that there's no point in following the ordinance, basically. Then if you can get to that point with people, I think they really understand it. So maybe there's a way to kind of shorten that down. But yeah, so I guess it's just about we're making a new, stronger ordinance, not there's already something in place. And then I have a question about I guess two more things. The home share idea, that is really, I think that's a great idea. And I think if we are going to allow any sort of Airbnbs, I think that is absolutely necessary. And I think that creates a whole other question of how to enforce that, because in other cities where they have that sort of rule, it's just the owner will say if anyone asks, tell them I live there, or if anyone asks, tell them you're my friend or something. So it's just anecdotally what I've seen is that I don't know how much that actually could be enforced. And so the last thing is, would it be possible to just do a straight up ban in areas that aren't in the coastal zone, knowing that regardless, it might not be possible to enforce these sort of half measures? And I know there's reasons why you wouldn't want to do it. Like Dick always talks about, like, well, if you have an extra room, it's a way people can actually afford to live here. And I find those arguments compelling as well. But I'm just interested in what the options are around like a real ban in the city.
Yeah, so I'll take that first. And it's kind of funny, and I appreciate you asking that, because before we had this hearing, I asked staff the same exact question. I was like, hey, just confirming, like, we're not allowed to ban them, right? It's like as a blanket, you know? So, and I got one answer, and then in the hearing, I said, just so everybody knows, we're not allowed to ban them. And they were like, actually, you are allowed to ban them. So what I took away from this is that there is not clarity on whether or not we are allowed to ban them. I do not have that clarity, but here's an answer I did get that I think we need to strongly consider, those of us who want to see none of them at all. If you ban them altogether, how are you going to enforce that? I mean, I know it sounds easy, but it's not. You have to have some kind of revenue to pay for the enforcement. And if you ban them outright, you're not getting any TOT with which you can then use to enforce. So it's a very difficult, and that's the situation we find ourselves in now, frankly. We're not getting any TOT, and we don't have any money with which to enforce, and it's actually not at all cheap. I mean, to me, it sounds simple. I don't know why it's so hard, but it is. It's actually quite complicated for the reasons you articulate. Like it's complex. It's not as clear as like, oh, I can see you're doing construction, therefore I know you're unpermitted. You know, I mean, there's lots of layers, requires a lot of staff time. And to ban outright, we don't have tools at our disposal to actually effectuate that ban. So, you know, that makes sense to me. I get that. And I would like us to move away from, I think the worst possible outcome for me is for us to continue in this vein where ostensibly we all want to limit them, but for some reason they're just running rampant all over the city, and we all know they're everywhere and we can't stop them. I mean, that's the worst outcome. I would love a ban if I could find some assurance that a ban would actually work. But we have what amounts to a ban right now, in that we are not able to enforce on our ordinance for whatever reason, and they're freaking everywhere in this city. So, I'm kind of like, well, maybe what we need to do is put something in place to get this incredible problem under control. And when we've sort of reduced the number of STRs down to somewhere that's not so obscene, maybe then we can have a conversation about whether through attrition. I mean, one of the ideas that I think could work is set up a system whereby they're permitted, and then say when you lose your permit, that permit's going away forever. So say we allow 200. If the 200 goes away because you move or you sell or whatever, now there's 199, and there's not going to be a 200. And then that happens with the next 10, and then there's 190. So over time, through attrition, all of them go away. Maybe it takes 10 years to get rid of those 200, but that's a way to protect the person that's just living in Santa Barbara and trying to make it work for as long as they're here. And then when they don't need that anymore, it goes away. I mean, I don't know. Those are the kind of things that we'll be discussing as the months go on. I think this is a many month process. And then your other question really quickly onto how to enforce the home share option. I asked that question as well. And the way that the permitting works, and I believe what I was told is you'll have to provide like tax records indicating what your primary home is, your primary address. And then if that doesn't match up, like if there's say I don't do STRs or I don't have a permit based on my apartment unit, and then it shows up on Airbnb, they would know. But yeah, you have to indicate your primary home through your tax records. So, I think you would have to really do a lot of fancy footwork to fake your tax records about where your primary home is. So I guess anything's possible.
Yeah, that's really helpful, the bit about the enforcement and needing the revenue. Thank you.
Gail.
Thank you. I want to kind of move on away from short-term housing, but I want to say first, Megan, I really like the way you're thinking about this, and maybe limiting it to Riviera-like spots in our community it's really worth thinking hard about. I think it's really important. I don't know how we get it politically, but increasing the tax on second homeowners, it's how it operates in Vermont. I hate it there because I pay it there, but it's fair, you know. It's just a tax on not being a community member. I spent a lot of time there. I try to be a good community member too, but I think that's really important, and it really is something we need to do. I'm really wanting to focus on what you started out with, which is this whole idea of getting a lot more money into the affordable housing, whether it's a loan fund or a grant fund. I mean, I think getting more dollars into your housing authority to build housing for low income, deed restricted in Santa Barbara is absolutely, you know, the only way we're going to solve the crisis that we already have and that is only going to get worse. So I guess I want to speak as a philanthropist. I'm ready to put my money there. I want to see exactly what it is. I want to know it's deed restricted. I want to know it's going to really build low-income housing, workforce housing. I want to see that happen. And I want you to go back to the Santa Barbara Foundation and say, we'd like you to invest a larger percentage of your principal in this loan fund. You know, get a real loan fund going, get some real money. You know, go back to all the smaller foundations and tell them the same thing. You know, put your money there, because all this stuff you're doing for your nonprofits, all your workers are going to be living in Texas and Florida. Come on.
So that's a good speech, I would say, Gail. And what you're implying there, though, I would like to foreground, which is that housing for these philanthropies is an investment, can be an investment for them.
Absolutely.
Not simply they're giving away their money, they're actually going to be making money this way. But it's why aren't they doing this already? So let's turn it back to Meagan. So what's your response to these things that Gail is asserting?
Well, I mean, like, amen is my response, honestly, but yes, 1,000% to all of it. But a couple of things. I mean, we've been talking now for a couple of years about this idea of a loan fund and what it can look like to provide equity into these projects to actually get them built, not as a grant, it is a form of quote unquote angel investing, but it's not charity, you know? I mean, because I have looked at pro forma after pro forma. I have sat down with Rob Fredericks and Skip Szymanski. I mean, they like don't want to hear from me anymore. We've been over this so many times. You can get a 3 to 5% return consistently all the time. I mean, and that is like being conservative. I mean, they can sometimes get even a little higher. The problem, though, and I think there's been a couple of problems. One, sorry, I'm going to go onto the porch while I talk to you. A couple of problems here. First, Jack is home, you guys, if you want to say hi to. This is Jack.
Wonderful. Thank you. We were waiting for that to happen, so thank you.
I know, that's why you guys are all here. You're not for me. There's been a couple of problems. I think the time frame for getting projects developed is so long that even investors who are interested in angel investing have struggled with the unknowns. It's like, how is it going to take 5-year project built? And if you need me to commit my capital right, I'm not going to for 8 years. I mean, it's a long time. And smaller investment funds just don't have the capacity to take on that kind of risk for such a low return. I mean, I think that's a generous way of thinking about it.
Whoops, you're frozen.
They're just
Okay.
You may have to
and
change.
I must have much op to make. Okay, let me come over here. Yeah.
There we go.
Is this better? All right, we'll go toward the router, not away from it. I think investors have seen that there's so much money to be made. There was, and that may be changing. That they haven't wanted to miss out on the bigger returns. I mean, if you could make 11 to 15% in regular housing development, I think that's hard for some folks to say, oh, we'll settle for 5 and maybe we'll start seeing it in 10 years. So I think that's why it hasn't happened, why I think there's an appetite now, for a couple reasons. I think the crisis has reached such an apex that people understand that it's absolutely critical. And then frankly, as the market is looking so freaky, it's like weirdly becoming quite a safe investment to invest in affordable housing. And as odd as that sounds from a financial perspective, I think it's looking safer and safer by the day to provide equity into an affordable housing fund. Those returns are guaranteed. And it's no longer a super safe bet that you're going to get 11 to 15% on a private, non-affordable or market rate housing development. It's just, there's lots of issues, lots of questions, and some of those questions just aren't applicable to affordable housing development. So I think there's the appetite there. And then finally, and I'll close with this, I think what we haven't had is city leadership. I mean, I really think that the city has needed to step up and say, we see you, philanthropic community. We're going to put our money where our mouth is. And I think what folks see when they see us dedicating $750,000 just to start, it's going to be more. I think what they say to themselves is the city's money's going in this. So it's unlikely they're going to try to stop these projects the way that they sometimes do. They're going to have every reason to roll out the red carpet. The state is now saying roll out the red carpet. Things are coming together in a way that we haven't seen over the last few years. And I think the real catalyst, frankly, has been the city finally saying, okay, we got to pony up because what we've been doing hasn't worked.
I think the stock market is also so volatile and so iffy right now. I think we sometimes forget to look at the smaller investors who understand the problems in our city and live here and would welcome an opportunity to invest in something that's going to benefit their lives and might bring them 3 or 4% guaranteed.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I've said this to you all before, but I am when doing corporate real estate work, I did a lot of work on REITs, which are real estate investment trusts. And I have this vision of like basically putting together a REIT, but for affordable housing in our city. And it's like that type of portfolio, it not only can work, but it would work. It absolutely would work. It's just, it's a little bit more complicated when you have government entities and multiple partners and that kind of thing, but we're moving in that direction and it's really exciting. I remember saying to Nick Welsh a couple of months ago, all I want in this world is to get civilian oversight passed and a loan fund up and running, and then I can leave council. And now I'm like, wait, I might have to come up with a new goal because things are moving quickly.
So you have added in the past, you've mentioned that the city's own reserve funds could be invested similarly. And have you made any headway on that?
I still believe that we should do that. I don't, that I think is a very, very, very hard lift.
Because
I don't see that happening.
Why is that?
Politics, honestly.
Well, politics is our business here, so.
I know. Well, so here's the thing. Being generous, there is a reality where our reserve fund has been very, very critical in floating our city through disaster, through severe economic downturn. Unfortunately, Santa Barbara is a tourist town. I mean, you guys know this, and we are so impacted by those types of externalities. And our reserve fund has gotten us through the crash of 2008 when the tourism just went through the floor. Same with the Thomas Fire and the debris flow. Same with COVID. I mean, our reserves have allowed us to continue without any reduction in services to our community. And we're a full service city. So we really provide quite a few services. And I think that's where the challenge comes in. For me, I'm kind of like, look, we're not serving people by not housing them either. And we could afford maybe 3% of our reserve fund to go in this way. We have a very high reserve requirement. But I understand, I think people they want to be prudent stewards of our tax dollars. And I do respect that. And I think that's what they would say. It's like, we're a tourist town and we need to have high reserves that are available to us without significant effort. And that's part of the problem too, is if we were to invest, we couldn't take it out in an emergency. And that's maybe one difference between where we invest now in LAIF and investing in an affordable housing project. So, I get it. And it's just also, and why I say it's political is, I think it's a very sort of progressive position to believe that investing our reserves into our community literally is the best use of our money and will keep us the safest. That is what I believe. But I understand it. I mean, I understand we've relied on our reserves a lot. So it's a balance. And I don't see, I don't believe that we would have the votes in the next 4 years to revise our reserve policy.
So every year, the major there's a thing called the Coastal Housing Coalition, made up of major employers in the region, talking about the need for housing for on a large scale for the workforce. And every year they have good panels and interesting ideas, and the same, I've been to a few of these, it's always the same. All of these ideas are thrown out and then nothing really has happened as a result of them in terms of employer-sponsored workforce housing. So, but I'm wondering whether the idea that that we've been just focusing on here about city and philanthropy partnership to build a affordable housing fund is, I don't know whether you're invited to or planning to attend that Coastal Housing Coalition, but that might be coming up in a couple of weeks, a venue where these folks need to hear this as a live idea that they can actually do something about. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
yeah, no, that's a really good idea, actually. It is on my calendar, so maybe I'll reach out to, I know someone who's on the organizing and see if there's a good forum or opportunity. I actually have a question for you guys though. Sorry, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but I've been thinking about this a lot, so I'd love your feedback on employer-sponsored housing. I understand, or I don't understand, actually. I'm not even going to say that. Everyone loves it, but I struggle with it because I'm like, I don't like employer-sponsored healthcare. Why would I want my employer to control my housing? So how is it that how is employer-sponsored housing good, but employer-sponsored healthcare is bad? And why should I not be worried about the power imbalance between employer and employee when the employer is controlling my housing?
Well, I can answer in that respect to the university. And once the good part of what they have done, I think, is that once people, faculty get the opportunity to buy below market housing through the university's creation of these, a homeowners association is the agency, not the university as the employer, but a homeowner association that actually is the operating framework. And it works more like a co-op arrangement than what you're talking about.
I'm
But
thinking like a shanty or a company town type thing, you know?
right, I understand, and I think that's a great question. The idea has been pushed for employer-sponsored housing that I've observed is progressive architects like Eddie Piker is a good example, strongly advocating that these corporations should be investing in this. We have one great example, which is Cottage Hospital built 150 units for their staff a number of years ago. I wonder how that works in terms of the concern that you're making. But it's a question maybe to be raised at that conference.
I just asked my question. Do we have any data? How many of those units that were restricted, they weren't sold on the open market because only a limited number? How many of them are still lived in by Cottage employees? What has happened with that? Can we get Cottage to get us the data so we understand?
That's a good question. I have no idea. I mean, it seems to me it should be.
And Gail, I saw your note about the report that was mentioned. What I will do is email it. I don't know if everyone's interested, but I can get it to you, or I can send it to Nadia and she can send it out to the group. It was a report that was done. It was commissioned by a foundation whose name I honestly forgot. I apologize. And it was put together by Romo and Associates. Ben Romo did it. He did something like 95 interviews with different stakeholders and philanthropic leaders. And it was primarily looking at homelessness. Like, we know we have this problem. What should we do to solve homelessness? And though I have worked with Ben, it was total coincidence that his report came out the day that I was going to push this at council. I know everyone was like, really? And I'm like, truly, if only I'd been smart enough to coordinate. I was not. It just happened to be very lucky. One of the major findings in his report was that the philanthropic community needs to get engaged in investment into the creation and development of affordable housing, quite literally by investing their dollars into these projects. And so that was, the point of the report was, let's have 5 action items. And that was like action item number 2, based on this research that had been commissioned. So it was in the context of homelessness. How do we solve homelessness? So slightly different, but you can't separate housing from homelessness. So I will make
our foundation.
Yes, thank you. Yeah,
that's why I remembered John Clark's name and talked to him this week. But
yes,
yeah, okay.
So I'll make sure that I'll send it to Nadia, but I'll copy you.
Send it to everybody.
Yeah. I will. It was a great report, and again, the timing was just amazing. It was so great. I was like, I love it. But again, all these things are coming together. I think everyone in the community is having that feeling, Gail, that you articulated so well, of just like, wait a second, we can actually make a marked difference in these issues. We just need to have the vehicle to do it, and then let's go. We all want a better community. So.
Rich Applebaum, welcome. We didn't introduce you.
I apologize for coming late to this. I was on another.
Better late than never.
So in terms of funding affordable housing, I don't know if this was discussed before I came on, but as you know, Los Angeles is about to vote on Measure ULA, which would be a real estate transfer tax on high-end real estate. Seems to me the likelihood of getting significant private funding to deal with the problems we have is it's limited. So what about some major way to generate funding through some type of a tax or something of that sort? And related to that then is, where would the housing go? Would it be citywide or countywide? Do we have an inventory of places where, if in a fantasy world, all the necessary housing could be built, could it be built? Meagan, I'd like to know your thoughts on these ideas, which are being discussed openly now and being thought about for down the line, just to give you a heads up.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. So last question first, with the fund as it's currently conceptualized with city money and philanthropic dollars, we would want it limited to the city of Santa Barbara. Because if $1 million or $2 million of city money is going into the fund, we really have to be able to tell our taxpayers that it's getting housing built in the city of Santa Barbara. And part of the reason for that is because if it was countywide, it's always easier to build housing in North County. And so if you see like, it would probably be much more likely that we just have a lot more projects up there than here. Now that could change if and to the extent there's a countywide tax that funds something like this. I mean, if it's a countywide tax, it would have to be countywide, open to countywide projects, but right now it's just not that way. I strongly support transfer tax. I strongly support, like Gail brought up, the tax on second homes, strongly support. Those don't have to be, transfer tax has to be countywide, but the second home tax, vacant home tax does not have to be countywide. It can just be the city of Santa Barbara. And I fully intend, I guess there we have my next project, I mean, I fully intend to pursue that, and it is a ballot. It requires going to the ballot. But I think we can absolutely do it, and that would go straight into the fund. But I am all for it. I think that's critical.
I think there's someone else clamoring for your attention, actually, besides us. Another question is Housing Trust Fund. How much money is in that? That's fairly small, isn't it? Housing Trust Fund currently?
Yeah, a couple million.
Well, wait, I think there's a confusion in my mind, and maybe generally. The fund called the Housing Trust Fund, run by Jennifer McGovern, is not a public entity, right? But there is a city. What Megan referred to at the beginning, before you did get here, was the creation of now the city's committed to starting putting funding into a housing trust fund within the city.
So here's a little distinction, and this is super, we need a different name.
That's right.
Okay, so there's Jennifer McGovern's fund, and then there is an existing affordable housing trust fund within community development.
Right.
So that has 1 or 2 million in it, and that's old RDA residual receipts funding. So that's just payback from RDA days, and it goes out. I mean, this year we've already given almost 2 million to the Housing Authority for projects. That's how that gets allocated. We put the 700, well, it's 250 this year, but we put that into the existing trust fund, earmarking it for the new trust fund. So again, these names, I'm going to, part of my communication issue. Okay, we're going to come up with something. The fund, yeah, so that's where, but there is already an existing fund, trust fund within the city, but that's related to RDA payments, and it's just not, there's so many rules associated with that money, and it's not sufficient anyway.
I mean, to remind everyone, this is all, this confusion dates back to the abolition of redevelopment agency by the state. That was a reliable source of revenue for affordable housing, and it got wiped out. And so rebuilding that capacity is one way to look at what we're talking about in this conversation right here. Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of creating a either city and or county level ballot initiatives to raise local funding on a large scale for housing is very much on the agenda of different people looking at this. Any other questions about either the short-term rental topic or the broader issue of social housing and how to maintain it? Linda?
What about housing bonds, especially at the county? I know that
the
mayor isn't too thrilled with the idea, but
he doesn't like
it. But what about on the county level?
I think a bond is a great idea too. That would be awesome. I mean, frankly, whatever we can get past and whatever we can get past most quickly, that's my only hesitation, even with the tax. And it's not a hesitation so much as like, those aren't immediate solutions, because if we can't get them on the ballot until 2024, and then it takes a year to see that come through, it's just not fast enough. So we have to work both. I mean, it has to be a yes and type conversation. But yeah, I a countywide bond, or even I'm trying to think if we can limit it anymore. Countywide bond would be awesome. I mean, I'm all in. Even a city bond would be great. Though I think the city has other options. I mean, I personally think we should pursue the vacancy tax first. I mean, that seems like such low hanging fruit before we go with a bond. But you know,
let me throw Benjamin is here, who's our housing advocates representative in Monique Lamone's office, and there are bills in the legislature that would be helpful in what we're talking about. I'm not asking you to give a complete inventory on that, but the one that didn't pass, but you and I and others have discussed, is the social housing bill that Assemblyman Lee proposed. And that, if it were to come into being, is actually would be a major reform that would help communities like ours. Tell us a little about that, Benjamin.
Yeah, you know, the bill that, as far as we understand it, would potentially create a California Housing Authority charged with developing affordable housing projects. And there's two funding mechanisms that would go into this new state department or agency. It might be a department. One would be the cost to run the agency, and then the capital funding to develop it. The bill passed the Assembly this year. There are also workforce requirements in the bill. It passed the Assembly. It did not pass the Senate. I think it didn't get out of a committee, but we can double check. Senator Lamone did not have a chance to vote on the bill. And there may be more conversations next year if this bill is going to be reintroduced. And if we want to get into it more later, happy to do so.
My sense of it is it's one of the most innovative, one of the most, let's call it, radical reforms that has come to the legislature. It's backed by construction unions, and they wrote into this law what you alluded to, labor requirements. So it's a way, from the union point of view, to require basically union members build housing, which is a big problem for the construction unions. Housing is largely built by non-union labor in the state. So that's their interest, immediate interest. But it's one thing that struck me about the bill, it's only for nonprofit housing. It is specifically excludes funding for private developed housing that's profit seeking. That's part of what's a significant reform here. I'm just bringing it up because I think this is something that a lot of us might want to look into and push for, because it did pass the Assembly, but I'm sure it's bogged down because the housing private industry is probably not interested in seeing this measure adopted. I mean, one of its features that will be controversial would be that this state agency could decide areas within a community for this kind of housing. I don't know how that would work, but it has that feature that overriding local constraint on housing would be built into this measure the way it was originally written. I'm getting too far into the weeds here, but it's the fact that this measure exists speaks to the general topic of the recognition now that we need financing for affordable housing, not just rely on the private market to bring it into being, and that the opportunities, as Megan's been implying, are growing for this locally and maybe even statewide. Any other questions, and anybody who has announcements they'd like to share with the group here, things that they want call people's attention to before we sign off?
May I ask a question? This is Lisa Carlos.
Yes, please.
Hi, sorry, Megan. I'm sorry. I'm en route to the Bay Area, so I'm not on video. I'm dialing in. First of all, thank you for all your efforts. I've been one of the people that have spoken at the council and the finance committee on having some type of fund set up that was actually funded by the city. So I think that's, you know, a momentous thing that you've started forward with, and thank you. And I want to second Gail's comments about, you know, now that we've seen city investment in a fund, we really need to approach our philanthropic community, especially those with large amounts of money, to put even more money than a matching grant, honestly, because I think, you know, it costs anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million to build a unit of housing in this city. And so what we're talking about is a huge capital outlay here. So it's going to take lots of money, which leads me to my second point and question, which is TOT. This is really controversial in our business community right now. You know, the business community is, in conversations I've been having, is taking umbrage with the fact that we are showing a nexus between the type of income that their laborers make and the need for additional affordable housing, and in particular the tourism industry, hospitality industry. Most of that labor force, if you get on Indeed.com or iHospitality.com or any of the job vacancy sites, you'll see that by and large, most of them fall in the 80% and below average median income area. And yet at the same time, the business community really doesn't want to be taxed for that with an increase in taxing of TOT or an increase in TOT. So the question comes back to whether or not the city would be willing to take what we've now seen as an uptick in TOT, but take the amount that goes into the general fund of the TOT. And I think you've made this argument before, Megan. Take an amount of that and allocate it specifically to this fund. And what are the politics around that? What are your thoughts on that right now, and sort of the context that I laid out?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Lisa, for all that you do. So this is a complicated one for a couple of reasons. I mean, I'll say at the outset, I strongly support an increase in the TOT, and you're spot on that people don't like it, but I'm sorry, you know, I mean, the nexus is absolutely clear in my mind. And, you know, by the way, our TOT is not high compared to other similar jurisdictions. And I think that's also key. I get it. I'm not afraid of taxes, but we also are on the lower end. And so if other similar jurisdictions have 2% higher TOT, seems to me absolutely reasonable to be in line with those other jurisdictions and use that increase toward affordable housing. So that is my strong preference. I think that is necessary, frankly. On the side of Jack saying hi. On the side of allocating the excess, yeah, I'm supportive of that too. I have a feeling that's probably he really wants to eat, the direction that we will go with this excess, but I am less bullish actually on this being a solution to our problems. This formula of if it's X percentage above Y, 20% of that goes to affordable. Like, yeah, we've had a couple of really good years, and I sincerely hope it continues. But we have seen numerous years, even since I've been on council, that we didn't meet that threshold. And so to me, it's being talked about sort of like a panacea, and I don't think it is. It's subject to the vagaries of the tourism market, just like our economy. And so to me, it's not, we should do it, and I 100% support it, but I worry that it's not going to be sufficient if we just do that excess model that's being spoken about. But to your question about the politics, this is one that I have a difficult time with, and I'll just speak very frankly to all of you. It is very difficult for me on the TOT question to navigate because we have very, very deserving employees who are severely underpaid. And what they see when we allocate TOT is us taking away from the general fund. The general fund is where their salary increases come from. And so it really does put me, I'm speaking just for myself. I don't know where my colleagues are on this, but I really struggle with this decision because it's my the two things closest to my heart are, I feel, being pitted against one another in this conversation: labor and housing. And of course, I believe strongly that if there's more affordable housing, it will serve our labor force. Like I know all that, but it's really hard when you're looking someone in the eye and they're like, you just told me that you can't afford to give me a 3% raise and you're giving $5 million to an affordable housing fund. Like, you're a liar, And so it's one of those things where hard decisions are going to have to be made, but the politics are definitely not easy. And by the way, I don't think people are being willfully obtuse. I think these are really deeply felt, really, really challenging things where our workers are like, inflation is 9%. And you're not giving me a 3% raise, and you're taking away from the general fund to do, you're taking money off of my children's table. And, that's the kind of thing that folks have said to me. So it's really trying to work closely with people. And yeah, I'm saying, well, we'll put a local preference but that doesn't matter when you can't feed your kids, So I just, that is my own personal struggle. That's my struggle with the politics. I think that's the political issue. And I think we can get there, but it's really tough with TOT. And that's part of why I like the specific allocation through a ballot measure, because it's not coming out of the general fund. It's it's something we can all get behind. But that's just being very blunt. I don't normally like to be quite so blunt, but that's the reality of what's challenging about that conversation for me, at least.
Okay, so I think we are all appreciative not only of your presence here, which was wonderful, but that bluntness is part of what makes us so glad to have you on the council and in our space here. And I think you just educated us a lot about the dilemmas within the progressive framework that we're facing right now on this kind of issue. And we have a rule of stopping at 1:30, but I'm going to call on Nadia to pitch. If you haven't yet committed to coming to the SBCAN fundraiser November 13th, she's going to tell you all about that. And Nancy McCrady's here. She posted something on chat. Take a look at this about another event in November that she's supporting. Thank you, Nancy. Go ahead, Nadia, with the final commercial announcement for today.
Sure, and I saw Gail had their hand up. I don't know if you want to put something in the chat or go quickly first.
I just wanted to say, for anybody who's coming to Bread and Roses on Sunday,
yes,
that the League and Clue will be there with a petition about criminal justice. Come and talk to us, and we'd love a slot on a future SBCAN meeting to talk about that petition.
Great, thank you. That we will.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, on November 13th, Sunday from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., we'll be gathering at El Paseo restaurant in Santa Barbara. We'll be honoring Senator Hannah-Beth Jackson, hearing about all her work and where she sees work in the Central Coast going in the future. And this is a new announcement, so you'll hear it here first. There will be a conversation between Senator Jackson and Santa Barbara's own Starshine Rochelle, who's a writer for the Santa Barbara Independent. So they'll have it should be a really interesting conversation, and we'll have some special surprise entertainment also from board member Gail McNeely. So yeah, that's the spiel I have.
And Senator Limon will be.
And Senator Limon, yes, thank you, yeah. So yeah, we have some sliding scale tickets available as well. If you know anyone who would like to come, but the cost is a concern, please email me. We also have sponsorships still available as well if you want to support SBCAN in that way. But yeah, hope to see you all there. And I'll put the link. The link is in the chat, but it's also just sbcan.org, or you can email me for tickets or anything else.
Hey, thank you. And Ken, do you want to say something more?
I just want to tack on to that 5 of the people on this call or their organizations are sponsors of the event. Thank you so much. And 4 of you have tickets and 5 others don't.
Oh.
And I hope you'll get a ticket. And one of you, who I'm going to send an invite right now to Nancy McCready, because I haven't sent a snail mail one to you. You're kind of new on our list. Hope you'll be able to join us. Thank you.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. Carry on our labor. Thank you, Nadia, for organizing us, and hope to see you soon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.